So every automation must contain a main sequence, and a main sequence begins with a start and ends with a stop. So when I connect those and update, at this point I have a working automation that doesn't do anything, but it contains a main sequence because the start and stop is there. If I remove that connector and add something in between, like a text-to-text prompt, that's where the magic happens. So now when I connect the start to my OpenAI prompt, I'll go in and edit that, and I'll say write a poem or something like that. Save it and update. At this point it'll write a poem when I run this sequence. So that is an example of a very simple main sequence. So the main sequence is great, but I might also want to do other things. I might want to break out of the main sequence once in a while and maybe run a sub loop or something like that. So for that we have functions. We have begin function, end function, and do function. And if we want to create a function, we just drag a begin and an end onto the screen. And something will go in between. So I'm going to break my connection up here, and I'll drag this little poetry writer down between these two. I'm going to connect it to the beginning and the end, and I'm going to double click my begin function. I'm going to name this poet. So now we have a named function. So whenever this runs, it will run this function and return to the main loop when it's done. And to run it, I just drag a do function over to the main loop, and I call it the same thing. I name it the same thing that our function is called. So I call this poet again, and I connect it, publish. So this will basically mirror our original functionality, but it breaks this OpenAI prompt out into its own thing. So I could work on this function, expand it, and just call it one time from my main loop, and it's going to do whatever is down in this function loop each time I call it. The other really great thing about functions is I can run it more than once. So if I want to run this 5 times, that will write 5 poems. So ChatGPT does a fine job at writing poetry, but just having it write a poem about anything probably doesn't do us much good. So that's where human in the loop comes in. I can drag a human in the loop node onto the stage. I can delete my connector, and I'm just going to put that in between. So I'm going to double click on that human in the loop, and I'm just going to define a question that we want to ask the user. And let's ask the user for the topic of the poem, and we can let them enter a topic in a text field, in a text area, or we can give them a select field. Let's just let them enter any topic in a text field. We'll make it required, and we'll save that. So now in our OpenAI prompt, I'll click on that, and instead of write a poem, we want to write a poem about this subject. And now the great thing about this automation tool is that every node is aware of every other node. So our human in the loop is ID 9. So if I right click on that and just click on the copy response and drop that in here, that's going to pass that value of the user response to my prompt. The only caveat is I have to turn process variables to yes so that it listens for that value. I'll save it, update, and so now we have a simple automation with a human in the loop. And I'll just run this really quick. Topic of the poem, let's say dogs and cats. And it's doing its thing. It's going out to ChatGPT, writing the poem, and so there's our poem. So the human in the loop node can not only pass information to a module like our OpenAI text-to-text module, it can also make decisions using decision point, and decision point determines where the sequence goes next. In this case, let's put a decision point and a human in the loop after our start node. So I'm going to move things around here a little bit. We'll put a human in the loop right after start. That's going to be a yes or no question. And our question will be, do you want to write a poem? Our question type will be select. With select, we just basically put one answer on each line, and it'll create a drop-down select for the user. So that's great. We'll just say yes or no. Save that. Put our decision point in there. So we're going to pass the human in the loop to the decision point. And our decision point can be yes or no, true or false, A or B, or other. And other, we can actually define custom strings. Let's just use other since we're on it. So we'll say yes for option 1, which is the the top output, and no for option 2. The text to evaluate. So it's basically going to look at the string we pass it and send it along its way, based on whether the string equals 1 or 2. So the string we want to evaluate is this human in the loop response. I'm going to copy that, paste it in there, and we'll want to process variables. So we'll set process variables to yes. Our evaluation criteria can be equals, contains, or does not contain. And contains is usually the safest. If it was yes plus something, contains would still get it. So I'm just going to set that to contains. I'll hit save, and so now we basically have a question, yes or no question. Do you want to write a poem? If they answer yes, it's going to go out of this top decision node, and we'll connect that to our poet module. If they answer no, let's just have it, we'll just end the sequence if they answer no. And I'm going to update that to save. Going to run my sequence. So do you want to write a poem? Yes, I do. Topic of the poem, dogs, and it goes out and writes the poem. Okay, so there's our poem about dogs. Let's run it again and say no this time. Start sequence. Do you want to write a poem? No. And that's it. So at that point it bailed before we wrote our poem. So the really cool thing about this is that you can, of course, this could go to a different function. It could also, we can chain together multiple decisions if we want more than just 2 options. We can also use AI to generate the string that we pass to a decision loop. So by doing that, we can actually create a agentic decision within our loop. We just have AI process some information and return one of 2 strings, let our decision point evaluate the string, and we basically have an AI generated decision at that point that sends it down the loop to wherever it thinks it should go. So pretty powerful stuff with decision point. So at this point we have a main loop with a human in the loop decision point and a function that can be accessed to write some poetry. I want to run this function more than once, and I'd like to keep track of all my poems in one central place. So to do that, I can create a variable, and this type of variable is a little bit different than any other node type in that it can be written to as the sequence goes forward. So it can actually jump back right to this variable and append or prepend or replace the content of it at any point in the sequence. So I usually like to add variables early in the sequence. Let's add it right after start, and that way we can be sure that it's available to every node moving forward. So I'm just going to connect it in there before my human in the loop. So here's our create variable. We'll just call this, we'll call the variable final copy. We can define the variable content up front if we want to. Let's just leave it blank for now, and we'll build on it as we go. So final copy is our variable name. and I'm going to, in our function, remove our connector to end function, and I'm going to drag a set variable name down into our function flow. I'm going to call that variable name the same thing, final copy. And so this will basically set the value of this variable way back here each time we go through this this function and write a poem. So I'm going to connect that, make sure that it's after our poetry writing text-to-text OpenAI model here, and I'm going to append, so I'm going to add to the end each time this is called, and I'm just going to copy my response 5, which is my OpenAI model. I'm going to drop it in there to the updated variable content, and I also want to set process variables to yes. And I'm just going to put a few asterisks before it, and that way it'll have asterisks separating each of my poems. So I'm going to hit save. I'm going to save that. The other thing I want to do is up here in my do function, let's run that. I'm going to have it repeat one time, so it should run it twice total. So I should end up with having it ask me if I want to write a poem, and then it sends it off to the function. When I say yes, it'll run this function 2 times. So each time the function runs, it'll ask me what the poem should be about. It'll write the poem, and then it'll store the poem up in this variable, the final copy variable. So at the end of it, after I run it twice, this final copy variable should contain 2 poems. So let's give it a try. I'm going to update that. I'm going to run my sequence. Do you want to write a poem? Yes. Topic of the poem. This is the first time through. Let's say dogs. And now it goes out and writes the poem. Ask the question again. Now it's the second time through the loop. This time we'll have it write a poem about cats. Okay, and sequence complete. So when we continue, here's our final copy prompt, which is create variable prompt. Right up at the top here, we start with a poem, and with every bark a song. So this one's about dogs, and then scrolling down, here's our poem about cats. So it did exactly what we wanted it to, combine those 2 responses into one central kind of content bucket. That's really powerful because we can, if it's a report, if it's even a web page, something like that, it can sort of generate individual pieces and parts, and this gives us a way to assemble them together and also near the top of the sequence, so we don't have to scroll down looking for it. So far we've looked at how to use human-in-the-loop nodes to provide input to AI prompts, and also how to make decisions. The third kind of human-in-the-loop actually lets us edit a piece of content that is generated by AI. To do that, I'm going to break the connection between OpenAI text-to-text and set variable value. And I'm going to add another human in the loop in between these. So after it writes the poem, I'm going to go to this human in the loop module. And I'm going to say, please edit. The question type is going to be a text area. And for the optional value, I can pre-populate this text area. I'm going to drop in the response generated by my text-to-text model. So it's basically going to drop the poem into a text area, which I can then edit as the user. I'm going to set process variables to yes, because we need to be able to interpret that response. I can also, if I want to, I can display material below. So I could say, original poem down here, just so I have a point of reference, and again put that same OpenAI text-to-text. So that looks good. So I've got basically an editor that will load after the poem is written, and then now when I'm going to link that to my set variable, and now when that variable sets, instead of setting it to my original OpenAI generated poem, I'm going to set it to my edited poem that I edited as the human in the loop. I'm going to save that and update. So let's run it and give it a try. And again, this should go through this loop twice when I run it. So I'm going to click Run Sequence. Do I want to write a poem? Yes. Topic of the poem, dogs. Okay, so here's the poem that it wrote. And again, down below it shows the original poem for review. Here's the editable version of this poem. And I can make any change I want. So I'll just add some copy above that says here's a poem about dogs, submit it, and that saves it. Now we're on to the next one. Let's have it write a poem about cats this time. Okay, there's the poem about cats, and I'll just say, and here is another poem, this time about cats. And I can change anything, right? So any part of the poem I want to change, I can do that and go in and edit. So I submit, and then here at the end, here's our final response, and here's our edited version of the poem about dogs and the poem about cats. So we basically added a way to actually edit the output from an LLM or an AI model. This could be used for anything, so it adds a ton of power. As you are in a large sequence, sometimes you don't get exactly the results that you expect, and this lets you go in and add a breakpoint, add a review process where you can actually go in, have a human being review the content, and that's going to affect everything that happens down the line in that sequence. So super powerful, and again, that's human in the loop used as an editor during the prompt sequence.